and welcome to Canadian Folk Tune History and Reflections, reviewed by me, Justin Veri, and today we'll be looking at a classic folk tune called Les Raftsmen, first archived by Edouard Zotique Mazico. Les Raftsmen is a part of French oral folklore, meaning its original version was never formalized in writing, and that its story and melody would have been handed down from the earliest days of French traditions. Traditional European folk music has been in Canada since the arrival of the first British and French settlers during the 16th and 17th centuries. As different French immigrants established themselves in Canada, they started to sing about what was new around them, life in the forest, the Great North. There were universal themes to the original songs and tales, but as folk traditions progressed in Quebec through the 19th century, subjects started to change and reflect historical events and characters. In rural areas, people would gather in town centers to hear the most popular folk tunes and would organize huge evenings of singing and storytelling. In urban areas, however, it was important to preserve and tell tales amongst one another, as lumberjack and raftsmen fought boredom and long isolations in the work camps. Here lies the first known origins of the Raftsmen. During the second half of the 19th century, it was sung by Quebecois lumbermen working on the Gatineau River in the Outaouais area north of Ottawa. In the winter, they would cut down trees, and in spring, they would float down the river, accompanying them on the rafts, singing their tunes. A little bit on the distribution. Since the study of folklore in North America is relatively young, the true collection and preservation of folk tunes and music didn't start until early 20th century. The actual archive and scientific study of this music didn't begin until 1914 with Maurice Bourbeau, anthropologist with the National Museum of Canada. His colleague, Franz Beau, drew his attention to French traditions, and Barbeau's discoveries and research became popular very quickly across Quebec. One of Barbeau's collaborators was Edouard Zotique Mazico, who helped bring the awareness of French folk music and traditions to the general public. Edouard Zotique Mazico, who lived from 1867 to 1947, was an extraordinary folklorist, historian, and archivist, to say the least. He graduated school in 1895 with a degree in law, but quickly abandoned that for journalism. What's important, though, is that his collection of folklore began in Montreal. He was one of few who started the École littéraire de Montréal in 1895, and renowned for his work. In 1911, he was made archivist of the Judicial District of Montreal. He first collaborated with Barbeau in 1917, became close acquaintances, and while working with him, collected over 5,000 different stories and songs. It is believed that amongst his travels and field research, Massico found a version of Les Raftsmen, most likely modified its lyrics and first exposed it to the public through its writings or basic recordings hand-distributed. He had a version that was both French and English and was sometimes called Bing sur la Ring. During the early 1920s, different versions started to appear. A baritone and folklorist by the name of Charles Marchand performed and recorded this song under the title Les Raftsmen. It's spelled R-A-F-T-M-A-N. Additionally, unlike Massico's version, Marchand is sung in all French. Charles first made his stage debut in 1919, and entering the 20s, he focused on Canadian folk music. By 1922, he founded his first quartet and started a movement, which survived throughout the 30s, dedicated to promoting Canadian songs. He toured with his band, called Le Carillon Canadien, throughout Canada, UK, and United States. Given the song's persistent popularity, it is presumed that with this band, he arranged and recorded the song. Charles had a short career after his sudden death in 1930, and yet, as sad as it is, this allowed other artists and groups to take the tune and make it their own. Later, in 1949, a more popularized version by Jacques Lebrec was recorded and put on to a couple of his LPs. What is important about Lebrec is that he was a very successful tenor and sang songs for different programs on Radio-Canada by the age of 17. With access to radio play this young, Lebrec was able to bring most of his music to the public. His work is still popular today with over 20 works which include different variations and versions of his music. Lebrec's version of Les Raftsmen was reissued in 1967 on the album Chansons folkloriques du Canada by RCA Records. Here's a recording off that album of Lebrec's version. Alan Mills, as we all know, was the artist behind the famous tune I Know a Lady Who Swallowed a Fly, had his own version of Les Raftsmen, recorded in 1975. His version sounded a little different than Jacques', as it included more instruments and fun choral-type parts. Mills, like Lebrec, also recorded with RCA Records, yet most of his work was with Folkways Records. It is on this label that he recorded the catchy folk tune. Here is a recording of Alan Mills' version. Further variations include Ruth Watson Henderson, who arranged a version for piano, baritone, and choir, also in 1975. Different versions have also been done by the Chorale de l'Université Saint-Joseph. It can also be found in songbook Canada's Stories and Song, published in 1965. A little on the cultural context. Les Raftsmen was a working song born out of logging camps in Ontario and Quebec. The 1800s were the height of the timber trade in Ottawa and Quebec, and in the 19th century, the Ottawa River timber trade was Canada's main source for wood production. Logs floated down the Ottawa River, readying for American and British markets. The trade involving timber and later sawed lumber helped communities prosper and aided population growth. Raftsmen work was in high demand and allowed for job opportunities to immigrants coming to Canada. The Raftsmen's work helped shape Canada's provincial foundation as we know it today. Unfortunately, the prosperous lumber trade ended during the early 1900s, but the folk-type work songs of European settlers, including French immigrants, lived on. Thanks to different composers, archivists, and publishers interested in preserving traditional Canadian folk music, music from our past can be celebrated, performed, and passed down for generations to come. And isn't that the point of folk music?